One of the biggest announcements to come out of this past week's Nintendo Direct is the inclusion of N64 games and possibly even more surprisingly, Sega Genesis games coming to Nintendo Switch Online in the near future. This is something that's been rumored for a really long time because of the fact that we got NES games and SNES games. Everyone was wondering if we were going to get any other systems represented in the near future, and there was some dialogue about possibly Game Boy games being added, which honestly is actually what I was kind of rooting for. I am wearing this shirt out of mourning, but it turns out that N64 is the system that we are getting. Now, we actually got a decent bit of info. They revealed the full list of titles that are going to be coming to N64 and Genesis right away, along with kind of a sneak peek at some additional N64 titles that will be coming later, but there's a lot of other stuff that's still kind of a hanging question. So I want to go over what we know and what we're still kind of waiting to find out. First off, what we know for sure so far. So N64 and Genesis are going to be added not as part of the core Nintendo Switch Online membership that is available right now, but instead will be added as a part of something called the expansion pack coming out sometime in October. When specifically in October, we don't know yet. They did say late October, so it won't be alongside the Switch OLED, which by the way, I am planning on a lot of Switch OLED coverage, so if you don't want to miss out on that, make sure to subscribe. But sometime in October, the expansion pack is going to launch as a premium version of Nintendo Switch Online where you pay an additional fee to get access to these other systems. How much that fee is, we don't know yet either. What we do know, though, is a full list of titles coming for both these systems at launch, with the N64 getting 9 games right away and the Genesis getting 12. Now, the N64 launch lineup is actually pretty solid. I think there's a few obvious titles here that no one's really surprised by. Ocarina of Time, Star Fox 64, Mario 64, despite the fact that we did get the Super Mario Collection, though that is now delisted, so I guess we now have confirmation that's why that was a limited time thing. Though there are a couple surprising additions. I think Win Back is a title that no one really expected to see being one of the games highlighted right away, and more interestingly, Sin and Punishment, which never came out on the N64 in the West, is going to be part of the collection as well, which is pretty neat. Now, while those are the games that we are launching with, Nintendo did also give us a sneak peek at some titles that are going to be added a little later, though we don't really have a timeline on that either, with a couple other, I think, very obvious titles like Majora's Mask, F-Zero X, Mario Golf, Kirby 64, Pokemon Snap, Paper Mario, and I think something that's a pleasant surprise is that Banjo-Kazooie is making its way as well, even though that is technically now owned by Microsoft. A favorite little point about that, by the way, Rare even tweeted out, hey, check it out, Banjo-Kazooie is really coming to Nintendo, but you can also still play it on Game Pass right now, by the way. Now, meanwhile, on the Sega Genesis, we got a list of 14 games, and the thing that's really interesting to me about this part of the service is that a Genesis collection already exists on the Switch. It is a game you can buy that comes with a large library of Genesis games, larger than we're currently seeing on this list of Nintendo Switch Online games, and while there is not a perfect amount of overlap, it's quite a bit actually. Out of the 14 games coming to Nintendo Switch Online, 9 of them are on this Sega Genesis collection. The 5 games that are exclusive to Nintendo Switch Online being Echo the Dolphin, Contra Hardcore, Musha, Strider, and Castlevania Bloodlines. Though it's worth noting, Bloodlines is also available on a separate Castlevania collection, along with a bunch of other classic Castlevania games. It almost kind of ends up working out like these games actually end up being a better advertisement for why you should maybe just pick up that standalone game, though, like I mentioned, 4 of them aren't present on there, so there is at least some degree of exclusive content available there. One thing worth noting too is the fact that because this is a separate service, the online multiplayer might work a little different. I know in the Sega Genesis collection, online multiplayer wasn't super great. I don't necessarily have the highest hopes for Nintendo Switch Online, but maybe it's going to be a bit better because doing things like co-op in Streets of Rage or Golden Axe is really fun. So that's what we know for sure, but now let's talk about some of the unknowns, some of which they have clearly set up right now. First off, what prices is this going to be? Because I'm not that shocked that they're going to be offering a higher tier service to add these additional systems, especially doing 2 at the same time. But how much more that's going to cost, I think, is definitely a sort of point of debate for a lot of people. And I think Nintendo is aware of this. I think part of the reason why they announced it at this Direct but didn't announce pricing yet is because they don't even actually have pricing fully set. I think they have a range. I think they have an idea of what they're going to charge, but they're kind of testing the waters right now and seeing what people are saying to kind of make that final decision of what that's going to be priced at. Now, if you're not paying attention to the pricing as it is right now, currently Nintendo Switch Online is $4 a month, or you can grab a whole year of service for $20. Now, if you want to use the logic of, well, the current service offers 2 systems, SNES, and NES, well, by offering 2 additional systems, they could go as all out as doubling the price, right? I mean, we could be seeing a $20 a year service for getting this expansion pack. I don't think it's going to go that high because Nintendo Switch Online does technically consist of more services than just these games, and I think that's maybe just a bit too aggressive for something that's being considered an upgrade or an add-on to the service. Now again, Nintendo has not really given us any indication of what this pricing is going to be, so this is purely just conjecture on my part. Personally, I feel like for me, I feel like a 50% boost. Like if I was paying $30 a year total, or an extra $1 or $2 a month to get those additional games, I feel like that works for me. I think they could get away with even more. There'd be a lot of complaints and some anger, but I think they can get away with more. But to me, I feel like a roughly 50% markup makes sense. And something else that I think is going to really heavily impact the perception of whether or not that price is worth it is what kind of continued support we're going to see this service get. Because as we're all very much well aware of right now, Nintendo Switch Online's drip feed of games has been really weird lately. There has been the occasional hidden gem or game that you may have never heard of that's actually really cool that was worth checking out, but for the most part, the last kind of few sets of games coming to NES and SNES haven't exactly been the cream of the crop that everyone's looking for. They had a really strong start with a few surprises mixed in, and then we kind of had some continual releases for a little bit that were really cool, and then it started getting kind of weird. And so with this expansion pack, there's kind of this almost like restart feeling right now where, okay, we're adding 2 new systems. There's some fresh blood going on. We're adding a new tier, so we're going to be charging more, and that's going to be like an upgrade to the service. How are things going to be handled from now on? Because if it's going to be that same kind of pacing where it's every few months we get a surprise drop of a few games no one's ever heard of, that's going to be a little awkward. And I think that's part of the reason why Nintendo kind of immediately put some of that fear to rest by being like, hey, here's some other N64 games you can look forward to, which was a great list of games, but note that much like how we don't have an official timeline for when this is all releasing, sometime in October, we don't have a timeline for how often those other games are going to get added. I mean, are those games we're going to be seeing over the course of the next year, over the course of the next 6 months? Are those all coming 3 months later? We don't know. And that's one of the annoying things about this, right? Because they're going to increase the price for having you get access to these services, but we don't really know the full shape of how much of it is going to be arriving how often. You're going to pay that money upfront to get the service, and then 6 months later, kind of see how you feel about it for what you've been paying every month, or if you bought the full year outright. Another question worth fielding too is, since we've gotten a look at some of the games coming to N64, how comprehensive of a list is that in the long run? Again, we don't know if those are games coming out in the next 3 months or if that's over the next year. And while I think that this is overall a pretty solid list of games, there's definitely a few glaring omissions that I think people would want to see. Now, some of them, I get why we're not seeing them. For instance, I know a lot of people are going to be clamoring for and really want GoldenEye, and I just don't see that happening because that is a rights nightmare. I mean, of course, there's the classic story about how it was going to come to Xbox Live Arcade, and that didn't end up happening. I just don't see that one really being a reality. But there are other ones that I think are kind of more surprising. For instance, Smash Brothers. The original one. I mean, sure, Melee is the big one for most people, and we do have Smash Bros. Ultimate right now, but you'd think that the original game, being on the N64, would be something they would want to include, and it's not there. Not in the launch titles or in the list of ones upcoming. We got Pokemon Snap, but we don't have Pokemon Stadium, which, also to be fair, Pokemon Stadium isn't really going to be at its full functionality if you don't have that Game Boy Cart connectivity, but I also don't really care, to be honest. I mean, yes, that is a better version of the game to have that, but the game without that is fine. I mean, if I can just play the mini games and not even necessarily focus on the stadium gameplay, I'm gonna have fun with that still. Also, since Banjo-Kazooie is going to be on the service, that opens up a lot of possibilities for other rare titles that run on N64. Donkey Kong 64 obviously would make sense since, Donkey Kong is still owned by Nintendo, so it's weird that's not there. I would also really like to see Ogre Battle 64, but I really don't think that one's gonna happen. Square hasn't really put any of their games on these libraries just yet, and instead have been focused on a lot of their own re-releases, so I want to get that in some form. If it was on Nintendo Switch Online, that'd be cool, but that's not gonna happen. One other thing we do know about, by the way, is that like with when the NES and SNES were added to Nintendo Switch Online, Nintendo is also going to be doing a limited run of new controllers tied to these systems, both for the Sega Genesis controller and the N64 controller. Now, like the SNES controller release and not like the NES one, these are sadly purely wireless controllers that don't have slide-on rails, which I really wish they did because I just want to see how ridiculous an N64 controller with slide rails would look like. But they're just wireless controllers. Another odd choice that stands out to me is the fact that the Genesis controller is going to be the 3-button setup for Europe and North America, while Japan specifically gets the 6-button option, which just feels odd. All this stuff in mind, I gotta say, my main takeaway right now is that I am very happy N64 games are actually coming to Nintendo Switch Online. I think the launch lineup is maybe a little smaller than I would have liked, but overall pretty strong. And I had zero expectations of Genesis happening, which again is a little weird given the kind of pre-existence of another way of playing a lot of these same games. But depending on what kind of titles are added over time, might turn into a real powerhouse alternative, and maybe you don't need to buy that collection, or just have both. But I think the really big hanging question in all of this is how much more they're going to charge. I openly admit, I'm probably going to jump in no matter what and enjoy it, but I'm just very curious to see what pricing they end up landing on and how the audience is going to react to that. So let me know down below in the comments what you guys think. Are there any games missing from these libraries you really want to see added? What price would you pay for this expansion? What do you think's too much? How high are you willing to go? Let me know down below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.